Okay. It is a great pleasure to have a speaker of this colloquium, Giulia Galli, which is professor at Pritzker School of Molecular Engineering and the Department of Chemistry at the University of Chicago, and director of the Midwest Integrated Center for Computational Materials at the Argonne National Laboratory. The colloquium will focus on simulations of complex materials from first principles. So solving the Schrödinger equation for electrons and nuclei of a complex material is prohibitively difficult even for systems of few atoms. Some properties can, however, still rigorously be obtained by mapping the problem into a self-consistent solution of an equation that involves only quantities depending on the electronic density of the ground state of the system. Some reasoned approximation can then be applied, and a simulation of the solution starting from this first principle approach can be carried out, also obtaining the derived spectroscopic responses. Despite the approximations involved in this approach, has improved understanding of materials and even suggested new ones. Giulia Galli is precisely a world-renowned leader in this field, expert in the development of theoretical and computational methods to predict and engineer material and molecular properties from first principles, especially as regards application to liquids and materials for sustainable energy sources and quantum technologies. She holds a PhD in physics from the International School of Advanced Studies in Trieste, and she is therefore a brilliant example of Italian excellence abroad. Before joining the University of Chicago at Argonne, she was the Swiss Federal Institute of Technology in Lausanne, then the head of the quantum simulation group at the Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, then professor of chemistry and physics at the University of California, Davis, where she was chair of the Deep Carbon Observatory's Extreme Physics and Chemistry Directorate. She is a member of the National Academy of Science, the American Academy of Art and Science, and the International Academy of Quantum Molecular Science. She has received several awards. Let me mention the Material Research Society Theory Award, the American Physical Society David Adler Award in Material Physics, the Tommasoni Chisesi Prize alla Sapienza, the Raman Prize for Computational Physics, the Feynman Nanotechnology Prize in Theory, and just this year, the Bernie Alder Seacam Prize for Computational Molecular Science. Thanks to her career, Giulia Galli is therefore an ideal guide to introduce us to this area of physics covered by this colloquium, at the crossroad between fundamental research and technological application of benefit of the society as a whole. So please.
Ripeto, grazie dell'invito, molto onorata di essere qui e di essere in questo luogo così storico. And I will switch to English, and I would like to tell you a little bit what we have learned about quantum simulation of materials from first principle on different topics. And I don't mind to be interrupted. I can be interrupted during my talk, and I can adjust. So if there are questions or clarification, please just stop me. So the first part of my talk is very general, okay? Because I thought that the audience maybe would be not a very homogeneous audience. And the very first thing that I want to do is to tell you why it's so important to study materials, okay? And also at the fundamental level. And there are materials, as we all know, that have really changed science and society, and some of them we are very familiar with. One is silicon, right? And it's, you know, it is on all in your cell phones. It is in all the data center. I will get back, by the way, on data center when I will briefly talk about, touch upon AI and about how much all these data centers are polluting the planet. But okay, hold that thought. Another material that we are probably all familiar with are lithium oxides. These are materials in batteries, and of course they power innumerable devices, and they are all over the place. By the way, these, unlike silicon and silicon dioxide that are very well understood also at the atomistic level, if you look at lithium, yeah, this pointer is strange. It's okay. So lithium oxides, as of today, at the microscopic level, they are not completely well understood. And you may be a little bit less material with superconducting magnets, but I'm sure that you are very familiar with the application of superconducting magnets, which is MRI, right? And also these change the world, basically, you know. And all these technologies that change the world are based on sort of simple materials. So what I want to tell you about today are materials for sustainability and also quantum technologies. And in this field, in these two fields, there are no winners yet. There is no silicon yet or no lithium oxides yet. And there is a lot of interest and a lot of studies try to understand which material would, you know, really make a difference. And sustainability here is in very, very broad sense, and it's just, you know, kind of energy sources that not destroy our ability to live in this planet, which we now, as of today, we are trying very hard to destroy, but maybe we should stop. And the other are materials for quantum information, and of course, you may have heard today, this year is the International Year of Quantum Science and Technology. Actually, looking on your website, you do have a conference going on in Padova these days on quantum materials and quantum information for energy applications. And I think that this will become more and more a very, very important topic of how, you know, you use these new quantum technologies also for energy applications. Okay, so what we do to study materials is to basically use theory and computation in collaboration with experiment, and theory and computation based on quantum mechanics, and computer simulation to implement those equations. And the goal at the end of the day would be to empower not only, and to build scientific tools through computer simulation to empower not only theorists, but also experimentalists at the end of the day who could be using these tools to do calculation. So what I will do in the rest of the talk, I would like to give you an idea, and I kept equations, I promise, to the very minimum, but give you an idea of the coupled methods and strategies that we use to study materials, and also not only us, they are used in the field. And then I will give you an example of material for sustainable energy sources, and specifically spin qubits used for quantum technologies. So, we are looking at materials at the atomistic level. So a material is a collection of atomic nuclei and electrons. We exactly know the equation that we want to solve. We don't know, of course, as everybody knows, how to solve it. And most of my talk, I would focus on the time-independent Schrödinger equation, and the dynamics will be actually, in most of my application, classical. So we solve the Schrödinger equation for the electrons, and I'll get to that. So if this is your goal, what you need to do is, first of all, to come up with approximation, right? And the two main approximations, one that was born in physics and the other in chemistry, are density functional theory and quantum chemistry method. Then you need to come up with numerical methods to solve this equation, because material is very complicated, right? And there is no way that you can do and solve this equation without very complex algorithm. Of course, materials are at finite temperature. You need to explore phase space. You need to understand temperature. And whatever you do, really, whatever you do, this is the important thing you need to describe: matter-light interaction, either using light and spectroscopy to understand what the material is composed of, or because you want to really make the interaction as part of your technology. So this is a very, very important part. And we want to do this from first principle. And why? Because at the end of the day, we would like to be predictive. So we don't want to fit experiment. We would like to be predictive. OK, very quickly, I will give you an idea of what is the basic of a framework that many in the field use. And the framework is density functional theory. So density functional theory is 60 years old. And it is an idea of, you know, in a way, at the time, very revolutionary. So at the time, 60 years ago, you know, most of the understanding of molecules was based on Hartree-Fock quantum chemistry. So the idea is I want to understand the wave function. And then Kohn and Cham and Hohenberger said, no, 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 no. The basic variable is the electronic density. We want to base the theory on something that we measure, not something that is much more difficult to measure. And then they derived the equation with assumption. And then they derived so there are, for the student in the audience, very important to understand. There is an assumption that nobody ever verifies that we use, which is at the basis of Kohn-Cham equation. And then there is an approximation, OK? Then actually there are many. This is an approximation that was made in the 80s. Chemists hated it, OK? And they said, absolutely not. We are not going to use this. But 10 years later, another approximation came about where the functional was described in a different way, and the chemists actually were sold to it. And now this is a theory that is used in physics, in chemistry, and also in material science. And really, this is a theory that has been a part of the unification of three fields, at least in theory and computation. Also misused and overused, but this is another problem. And we need to remember that there are approximations all over the place. And you will read in many papers, we use DFT. Keep in mind that saying we use DFT doesn't mean much, because you need to specify the functional that you are using, OK? And there are many different functionals. And in my opinion, these stairs like this, in this messy way, are to tell you that this is not a theory that is systematically improvable. Quantum chemistry is, density functional theory is not. And we should keep this in mind. 20 years after density functional theory, the solution of the Kohn-Cham equation was used. And on the fly, Karen Parinello coupled this with molecular dynamics, F equal ma. This is how to include temperature classically. And this was also 20 years after, same year, 1964, after molecular dynamics actually was invented, Anis Rahman and Bernie Older. Of course, you know, if you just use molecular dynamics, you don't understand quantum effects. And so you can use other theories like path integral to understand quantum effects. And if you only use molecular dynamics, you will never understand a ragged surface like this, right, in which the materials and the particles move. And then people have invented methods that are called advanced sampling to overcome barriers without simulating forever. And here, just I'm mentioning one of the applications of all these methods, not path integral, but first principle molecular dynamic and advanced sampling that we did recently to study defects that are important for spin qubits, quantum materials. And I'll get back to that. OK, so when we have all this, and we know how to solve this on the computer, we can actually study materials of very different types. We can study oxide-oxide interfaces, water interface with a solid or spin qubit. And we use this method to derive structural models. question, how do you know that your structural model even makes sense, okay? If you have a solid, you have X-ray, fine. But how do you know, right? So what you do then, once you have a structural model, you actually probe it with spectroscopy. This is why spectroscopy is so important. You would derive a structural model. You do spectroscopy, which can be vibrational or it can be optical, and then you compare with experiment. You go back and forth, and you convince yourself that your model makes sense. So over the year, we have worked at vibrational spectroscopy. And just to give you an idea of the progress, I actually, these are examples by, based on my own work, but many other people have made this kind of progress. This is the very first principle. This is the end of my PhD thesis, very first principle simulation of amorphous carbon. We were absolutely not able to do any spectroscopy at that. By the way, the day I drew this picture that many of you in the audience, I'm sure, think is pathetic picture, I was so happy. I was incredibly happy, and now when I show this picture, they tell me, what is this? But anyway, this is a picture of atoms drawn many years ago. And we were not absolutely able to do spectroscopy, but we learned. And also we learned, this is a paper on the same system many years later, 2022, where we could actually include the nuclear quantum effect, study the electrical conductivity by including electron phonon and nuclear quantum effect. And over the year, we were able to study IR and Raman coupled with first principle molecular dynamics. You can do this if you're able to compute dipole and polarizability. And this is one of the latest studies, same system, that we did, where we were able to do electric field-dependent infrared. This is very sophisticated kind of calculation where we can compare directly with experiment. By the way, this is amorphous carbon with oxygen is a material used as an electrode in batteries. So we also understood the physics of this material. But I want to use this slide to make you understand how much progress has been made, and again, of course, not only by us, by going from a very small first principle MD to coupling MD with also spectroscopic way, spectroscopic techniques, and then to even do simulation in an electric field and understand this complex experiment. In the last 15 years, actually, most of our effort has been put in understanding electronic excitation and optical spectroscopy, and to go beyond the density functional theory. And we use the many-body perturbation theory. Okay. Again, we use the many-body perturbation theory starting from papers. Again, same years, 1965, back 60 years. This is a paper by Lars Hedin, where he came up with a way of going beyond, well, the density functional theory was not even, now we say going beyond, but it was not even developed. But basically, what he came up with is a way of treating an electromagnetic field that interact with your material, electromagnetic field light, right, in a classical way, in a perturbative way, and using Green's function. And for the expert in the audience, this is the beginning of GW method and also of the solution of the Bethe-Salpeter equation. That is what we have been doing for many years. So before telling you what we do, I would like to tell you that this paper, basically, this is something you would never write today. This is a paper that says, besides a proof of a modified Latinger-Work-Line variational principle and related self-consistency idea, which is unbelievable, there is not much new in principle in this paper. So first today, you would never say anything like this because you always want to tell everybody that you are the king of the world. But this is an unbelievable paper, and this is the end of the abstract. But anyway, so based on this paper, we and many others, you know, it's, again, I'm telling you about my own work, but there is a community working on this. We were able to do spectroscopic characterization based on many-body perturbation theory, Green's function method, and recently based on embedding theory. I'll get back to that in a minute, because these are theories that we use for strongly correlated material. It is very important because strong correlation is involved in many materials for quantum information science. But to finish the story of why this is important, the key role of computational spectroscopy is to validate your structural model, because, you know, if the system is disordered, you don't have X-ray. I mean, you have X-ray, but you want to validate your structural model, and you want to predict light-matter interaction. And usually, you need to use multiple probes to understand whether you have a good model of your material, vibrational, optical, and so on and so forth. So when we started looking at materials, I will give you examples for quantum information in blue on this slide, we realized that many-body perturbation theory was not enough. And it's not enough because perturbation theory, you know, it was not enough to describe the correlation and the fact that there were entangled states, right, in the system. And we started developing what we call quantum embedding for multi-reference state. What do I mean by that? I mean that you have a system that is derived, that is all described by density functional theory. And then you have inside this system a region where you know, and you have to know that, otherwise it doesn't work, that there is a region where there are some localized correlated states, and you want to describe them with a high-level method, while you want to describe the rest of the material with a low-level method. And we developed this theory where the low level now is GW, many-body perturbation theory, and the high level is configuration interaction, which is a very sophisticated quantum chemistry method. And you know, we coupled several algorithmic development to solve a many-body Hamiltonian in second quantization. And we were able, by coupling these, you know, you can ask me about that, and we can discuss it if you're interested, but this is the bottom line, that we developed a method to do this, to describe highly correlated states in a matrix of solid, which is not highly correlated, which is scalable to solids with hundreds of atoms. You need to go at least to hundreds of atoms if you want to understand realistic materials. Otherwise, basically, and this is, so because we now are able to describe some highly correlated state in second quantization, and we have a Hamiltonian that is not a mean field like DFT, we can think of also solving this Hamiltonian on a quantum computer. And so this is what we did. I am not talking about calculation in any detail on quantum computers. I am just flashing what we have done. And I want to say a couple of things. Once you have a Hamiltonian in second quantization, there are transformations that people have come up with. And if you have heard about this, Jordan, Wigner, whatever, that allows you to map your Hamiltonian on qubits, okay? And because we could do this for realistic system, meaning defects in solid, we could do on quantum computer realistic calculation. Did we solve a problem that could not be solved before? No. This is the same problem that you can solve on a classical computer, but we learned how to do it, and this is very important, and this is what this picture is supposed to tell you. We learned how to couple our solution to noise mitigation techniques. A quantum computer is super noisy these days, and if you don't have techniques to lower the noise while you solve your equation, you don't get a meaningful result, and this is what we did, and we did this on both IBM machine and IonQ platforms that were made available to us. If you have questions, I'd be happy to answer this question. So before I now give you examples, I want to summarize the type of calculation that I told you about, and so that you keep in mind all the what we will use, right? So we do first principle molecular dynamics, in some cases path integral. We actually do many body perturbation theory for some interaction with light, and for highly correlated states, we do quantum embedding. In all of these calculations, many body perturbation theory, quantum embedding, the input is DFT. So you always start from DFT. So it's really a practical pillar for calculation also beyond DFT. And what I also always tell my students is not with you, but not without you. So not with DFT only, but not without DFT either. Because if you don't have the basic equation, you don't build, at least the way we do things, many body perturbation theory and quantum embedding. Anyway, so I will specify here and there what we do, but this is what we do, okay? And use these three kinds of methods. Questions? No questions? Do you want to see more equations? No? Okay. Okay, so let me now give you some examples, right? These are 4 questions that we have been trying to answer. General question on sustainable energy for a long time. We have been working on these problems one way or the other in the last 15 years or so. And one question is, how do we find the best material to trigger photoreaction to generate clean fuel from water? You know, hydrogen production from water. Also, other type of reaction where we want to generate reaction at surfaces that could clean water from pollutant, solar cells, and since recently, by recently I mean in the last 5 or 7 years, we have been very interested in materials for low power electronic and for neuromorphic platforms. So what is the common trait of these materials? They are heterogeneous, they are defective, and they have very complex interfaces. And this is why I insisted so much at the beginning about the fact that you had to come up with algorithm to study very large systems. So I will pick 2 examples. And the first example is water photocatalysis. And instead of giving specific on a material, I will answer questions on the specifics. I would like to give you an idea on what you have to do if you want to study this system. So basically, you have a solid in contact with water. The solid is hit by light, and it absorbs light. And there are charges that are formed in the solid, electron-hole pairs, that you want to take to the interface and use them to split water. Okay, so if you want to do this, the very first thing that you have to understand is how the electrons are absorbed by their solid, and we do this by doing many body perturbation theory and solving the Bethe-Salpeter equation. This is one of the methods based on Green's function. Then you need to put your solid in contact with water, finite temperature. There you cannot get away with 0 temperature, and you do first principle molecular dynamics. For this system, it is very important to have so-called hybrid functional, because otherwise, if you're not accurate enough, you cannot understand the problem. And then, if you want to understand the really computational spectroscopy, you also need to understand forces in the excited states. Let me leave it at that, but I could talk to that. And then you need to describe a transport of charges, right? I don't seem to be able to keep this on. But so you need to describe transport of charges that are the charges that go. So as you see, this is an incredibly complex problem where at each step of the way, to make sure that what you do makes sense, you have to compare with experiment. You cannot just compare to experiment at the very end. No way. And we did all this work in collaboration with experimentalists for many years. And every time we encounter a specific problem, actually we stopped to do some algorithmic development to make our calculation more efficient. And this is to give you an idea about the complexity of how to put together all these methods. And I want to really emphasize all of these methods and all of this calculation makes sense once you are able to compare with experiment. We study specifically one system, bismuth vanadate, and we studied defects, we studied surfaces, interfaces. And one thing that I would like to point out is that in our studies, we made prediction before they made the measurements, and our calculations were validated by experiments. Not all of them, but so to say that when you put all together a bunch of these methods, you can be predictive and you can predict not only materials, but processes, what happens in your material before experiments do the measurement. And also, you can interpret experiment. In the last few years, as I said, we have been very interested in other type of oxides for low power electronic, and also to study neuromorphic architecture. And there too, we have made predictions that have been validated by experiment. So let me just spend 2 words about why are we interested in that. So first of all, there is an incredible growth in computer powers. Everybody has heard about NVIDIA, about all these incredible data centers that all these big companies are putting everywhere. But it's not scalable, right? Because we are still using a very high power electronics. And so if we want to make it scalable, at some point, we will have to go through low power. And one way to do low power is to think about neuromorphic architecture. So our devices are based on what is called von Neumann architecture, where the calculation and the memory are separated. In our brain, calculation and memories are not separated. Of course, I'm simplifying a lot. We are interested, as many other people, in finding materials to which you can apply a very small bias, and they spike. They spike like a neuron or a synapses. They are not, they are different, they spike. But basically, think about, what about an oxide to which you apply a very small difference of potential, and this, you have a very, very large spike. What could this be? One physical representation of this is a metal to insulator transition, meaning you have a material which is close to instability. It is a semiconductor with a small bias, it becomes a metal. This is the equivalent of a spike because it's a huge change in your material. How do you realize this? One way to realize this is to take some transition metal oxides and change the number of oxygen vacancy that is in the oxide. And how do you change it and how do you move it to the small bias? So we have studied this to characterize the transformation of our system. We have also we have understood electrical bias models, and this is very, very important. We have worked with the experimentalists to actually compare spectra that we computed with what they measured to convince ourselves that we were looking at a realistic material. And so one thing that I should mention is that for these materials, the level of theory that we are able to use is much lower than the level of theory that I showed you before. And this is because they are very, for the expert, it's DFT plus U. And there is a parameter that we kind of fix by doing something that is not quite good. I mean, it's good, but it's not, you cannot really completely call it from first principle. We fix it a little bit by comparing with experiment. So we have a long way to go, but if you see from what we did to understand transformation and to understand the defect concentration, we understood how the material works. To be accurate, long, long way to go. Okay, the last example that I want to give to you is about materials for quantum information technology. And basically what we want to do, we want to create coherent quantum states. So we want to put the material in a quantum state and we want it to stay there. And we also want to, entangle different states for different type of application, computing, sensing, and communication. And if you want to do this, again, you need to understand the interaction of the material with light, because we will use light to actually look at electronic transition that we use to create coherent states. Then you need to understand first principle molecular dynamics, because you want to understand how defects form. And finally, recently, we have done high throughput calculation. Let me just give you some ideas here. So suppose that you have a diamond lattice, and in your diamond lattice, you create a very tiny point defect. For example, nitrogen vacancy. You remove one carbon, you put one nitrogen, and you charge it negatively. And then you create states, electronic states in the gap. This is what those states are. And then with light, you create a cycle that you use to interrogate your defect and to prepare your coherent state. So you need to understand, again, light matter interaction, absorption, photoluminescence. You need to understand intersystem crossing, absolutely not trivial. And then you need to understand optically detected magnetic resonance, which is what the experimentalists finally measure to understand what the transitions are. And I want to give you an idea of the agreement with experiment that today we can have for relatively simple system. One is a defect in silicon carbide, and the other is a defect in diamond. These are not fits. These are agreement with experiment that it's not cheap, okay? But you can have. These are spectra compared to experiment as a function of temperature. And since very recently, we could also do a defect which is much more complicated because it's transition metal in an insulator. And again, this is, we have a long way to go. This is not perfect, but it's good enough for you to understand a lot of the physics of the material. So once you are, let me skip this. Once you have prepared with your defect, your system in the coherent state, you want to know how long it stays there, the coherence time. And how long it stays there, it is determined by your electronic spin interacting with the nuclear spin and other defects. For the interaction with the electronic spin, actually, of the electronic spin with the nucleus, we use spin Hamiltonians with parameters derived from DFT. This is another very long story, but you set up a spin Hamiltonian, and then you look at the time evolution of the spin Hamiltonian and how long your system takes to decay. So you have done all your electronic states. You then compute spin Hamiltonian parameters like hyperfine, zero field splitting. You set up your Hamiltonian. You do a dynamics. If you look at this for a minute, you immediately realize that this is not solvable like this. So you need to do some approximation. We can talk about this. And then you look at how it decays. This tells you how long your states will stay there before the interaction with the nuclear destroys everything. There are other interactions, and we have studied two-dimensional materials. We have studied spin qubit. This is a paper I've been talking with some of you, done just in collaboration with some student and postdoc who came visit my group from Perugia, from the group of Filippo De Angelis, and looking at molecular qubits. And we have also been using our method to look at the growth of thin films. Like we do in electronic structure theory for these problems, let's see. For these problems, we have written codes and we have made codes available, and they are all open source codes. Okay, so let me just show a couple of slides of conclusions. So I didn't talk much about AI because I don't know yet exactly what the real impact. I mean, there will be an impact in our field of AI for sure. But honestly, I'm wondering, so we want to use machine learning and AI to have much bigger sample and much longer simulation time that we have now, right? And to some extent, we, and of course many others, have done this for systems. But then when you want to go back and study the electronic structure calculation, you are back to a big problem that the electronic structure calculation cannot be done on the huge system. But anyway, we can talk more about this. So I actually think that developing method and algorithm and coupling them is very important. Be aware of the fact that there are many properties of interest that are not computable today at the level of accuracy that we need. So if you want to compute conductivities, very textbook properties, very difficult to compute them at the level of, if you want to understand the proton hopping at an interface, very difficult to get numbers. I told you that everything is based on DFT, true. However, sometimes the successes of DFT have kind of obfuscated the fact that we do need to develop much more advanced methods, right? Yes, DFT is the basis, but many properties, interaction of matter and light cannot be computed only with DFT. And so AI, we need to understand when we use machine learning and AI, what we mean when we say that we are right with our model. What do we compare it with? What is the ground truth? We do calculation for 10,000 atoms. What do we compute it with? Well, compare it with just directly with experiment. We cannot do the direct calculation. So there are serious problems here. And there are also a serious problem on asking yourself, what's the role of academia? So this picture here is so the red line, so this is the number of GPUs that the whole Department of Energy of the United States has. This is the red line. These are the number of GPUs that Microsoft and Meta have. So the whole Department of Energy. So we are a tiny bit of Department of Energy funded as of today. People in the United States, so we are not even appearing here. And so what can we do in our competition with industry? I think we can be smart and we can compute, we can come up with new methods, new algorithms, and so on and so forth. But in sheer computer power, we will never compete. Okay? They all have now centers where they do simulation of materials with this power. And again, this is the Department of Energy. In my opinion, availability of code and data is very important because it's the only way in which we will check each other out and we will know whether what we do makes sense. And the other thing is that we need to understand, and this is more when I give talk in the United States, because our funding agency didn't get the idea, software development is expensive. And it's expensive because it is a long time, it takes a long time, and they have to pay people to do that. And they haven't gotten that message yet so much, but anyway. In terms of quantum computers, I don't think that there are physics or chemistry problem entirely solved on quantum computers, in spite of sometimes when you read out there. It doesn't mean that it's not worth looking at quantum computers, right? Because we need to learn how to use them eventually. But we need to keep in mind that as of today, if we don't couple our method with noise-resilient algorithm, we will not go very far. So you do a simulation and you publish your paper and you say, I've done it on a quantum simulator. Good, but not good enough. Because if you do then on a device, on a quantum device, it will be noisy, and you don't know if your results will survive or not. And the last thing oh my God. And the last thing that I really want to say is that the other important role is the role of instrumentation and experiment. And we all pride ourselves to compare with experiment, and I told you many times we compare with experiment. But it's not a given. There are some properties that are very difficult to compare with experiment, and we need new strategies, and then, especially for system, using quantum technology, on which samples are experiments done. There are several experiments, they disagree, and in many instances, they don't describe the sample that they use, right? And so it's very difficult for us also to compare and to understand what's going on. So I would like to, of course, thank my group, and I've been very fortunate to have many students and postdoc with fellowship and be funded by several funding agencies, and I had many experimental and theoretical collaborators. And for the student in the audience, if you're not too scared about the news that you hear about the United States and you're brave, we have opening for PhD students and for postdoctoral position, and we are hiring. And I'd be very happy to receive your application. Even senior people, if you want to apply, it's fine. That's Thank you very much for your attention, and thanks for the invitation.
Well, thank you very much for a very interesting and clear talk. And now it's time for questions.
What's the role of fluctuations in these results? Normally, when you solve this numerically, fluctuations are relevant, or it's more the mean level that is...
So it depends what you mean by fluctuation. If fluctuation you mean when we do a classical molecular dynamics and we try to understand electron form, very relevant, because I didn't show this, but if you do a calculation, so for example, when you have water in contact with an oxide, fluctuations are so relevant because it is when fluctuation happens and there is an out of equilibrium situation that the chemical reaction can be triggered. So they are incredibly relevant. Then there are other type of fluctuation. There are the fluctuation of noise in the spin qubit. And if it is quantum noise, they are relevant, much less well understood. I didn't have time to say much about that, but fluctuations are incredibly relevant.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the talk. We have seen the study of the interface between solids and water. I would like to ask if there are studies about the interface between solid and gases. I think it would be interesting to study, for example, the removal of greenhouse gases from the atmosphere.
So There are a lot of there are a lot of studies done by many groups. And so from a theoretical point of view, for us, there is not much difference between a gas or a liquid, in the sense that it is, they are dynamical system in different regimes. And having said that, when people look at gases, either they go to the extreme dilute limit, where you just have a bunch of molecules that not interact very much with the surface, and if the density is very low, to really describe completely the gas is not simple, but the methods are the same. A removal of gases in the atmosphere, and you are probably thinking about methane and CO2. They are difficult molecules to have interacting with surfaces because of quantum effects, even at room temperature, and because there are a lot of van der Waals kind of interaction that it's not simple to. So in principle, you can do everything, okay? In practice, there are a lot of technical issue on which functional to use and stuff like that.
Thank you, Giulia, for this very interesting and beautiful seminar. I have just a curiosity. You mentioned a lot of methods where you mix in some way density functional theory to treat part of your system and higher level techniques like configuration interactions, or you mix DFT for electrons and path integral for the nuclei. What about the old route, let's say, is it still going on a search for the perfect correlation functional, or it doesn't make sense?
We have done, this is, I didn't mention this, this is a very active field of research where people are putting a lot of effort in looking for functionals, especially because there have been a lot of studies where people have identified functional, for example, hybrid functional for certain classes, or other, van der Waals functional for the molecules. And then when you have an interface, what do you do, right? We have worked a little bit on that, but so there is a huge effort. So a couple of years ago, there is a huge effort going on at Google and Microsoft. Unfortunately, their results are closed. They publish the results, but they don't publish the codes, where they are using AI and now generative AI to have a functional with zillions of parameters, and determining this by grabbing all calculations that have been done and trying to determine those functionals. Maybe there will be successful, very difficult to interpret, but it's a very active field of research, and very active field of research to see whether you can define a functional from quantum chemistry methods. If you think about this, it's unbelievable how many problems we still have after so many years. We have functional for specific problems, but general functional we don't yet. It's a very active field of research.
Because I am yes. As you know, I am coordinating the Bachelor and Master in Material Science here in Padova, and I would like to know what is your opinion or comment about the material science degree in US?
Well, the first comment is that it is increasingly more and more popular. And for several reasons. One is that with the, growing interest, for example, in quantum technologies, it's very clear, and this is also the message that I tried to give at the beginning, is that there is a search for the materials, right, that would power the quantum technology, the communication, sensing, and so on and so forth. And so there is a real interest. Then there is the hope that finally we could do really massive searches of material with the eye. I'm not sure about that, but there is this, and maybe we'll get there. The other thing is that, and I don't want to, I'm a physicist myself before I say what I said now. But physicists in specifically certain department, at least in the United States, have looked down on computation for a long time. And they like their Hubbard models and superconductivity, and this is great, if you like that. Now they have understood that there is a lot of physics in material science, and they are increasingly buying into that. And I think that students are also excited about the fact that it's really, truly interdisciplinary. There is chemistry, there is physics. So it's much, much more, compared to 10 years ago, it's incredibly more popular. So you have asked, in a way, the wrong person, because I'm so biased about the importance that I am not going to say anything, to weaken this. No, but it's true. I mean, there is more and more important. That's.
Just a curiosity from an outsider, in this approach, there is big difference between solids and liquids in the calculations?
Yeah, I mean, if the solids is very disordered, so first of all, the very first big difference is that to some extent you can study a solid at t equals 0 for some. A liquid, you cannot study, I mean, unless you want to study helium-3 or something, but you have to include temperature, right? And so this is the first difficulty. And if you have a solid with a lot of interfaces and a lot of defects, it's, in terms of difficulty, start looking more and more like liquid because of all the difficulties. Usually comparing a liquid with experiment is more complicated than comparing the results for a solid. Especially if the liquid is light, like water.
Thank you. So you material sciences. So your description of how you work together with experiment, so theory, experiment, so to me it sounds like a very nice synergy. So theory and experiment marching together, this is a nice example of what science can be and how it can advance. And there is a lot of philosophical discussion about the role of experiment and theory and how they work together. So you mainly described how you use experiment to validate your predictions. Are there other roles that you can, in your field, that you can attribute to experiment?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I chose to give a very general overview, but in all the field of spin defects, really, and also for the spin Hamiltonian to understand the coherent state, we do a lot of work, and by we I mean the community, in interpreting experiment. And I really think that many of us have shown that the interpretation coming from theory is so incredibly important. Otherwise, you really don't understand the physics. And this here, these kind of, for example, these spectra, right? That they are not. These spectra. These are. Some are absorption spectra, some are photoluminescent spectra. It's not only a nice picture to say, look at the agreement, but we could interpret those peaks, and we could understand, for example, in the case of diamond, by the way, these are singlet transition, these are difficult. we could understand the key role of phonons and non-adiabatic interaction, and then we could understand the relevance of what we did to infrared absorption-based magnetometry. So it is because we interpret those spectra that we understood how certain systems worked, and the same for localized impurities. So I think that this is very important. By the way, of course, I chose 3 examples where the agreement is great, okay? And there are several of those examples. There are also examples where the agreement is not that great. But that's why we have a job, because we have to continue trying to understand other systems.
I also have another curiosity, maybe, okay, sorry.
So I saw you were mentioning a coupling between CI and GW, and I was wondering I don't know this method. I mean, I don't know the coupling, I know that a separate method, but is the idea to have just a renormalized Coulomb interaction, maybe a screening of the, I don't understand how the coupling works.
Okay, so GW, the idea of GW itself is to rederive the equation of interacting electrons in the field of nuclei, not in terms of Coulomb interaction, but of screened Coulomb interaction. So, you can derive those also from the Maxwell equation, right? There is a screening between D and E classically. Then the coupling of GW and CI is, it's more complicated. So you have a Hamiltonian that you derive in second quantization with the potential and kinetic energy parameters that you can write in part in terms of the interaction of one region with the host. And I mean, to understand exactly how this interacts, so basically the CI is the method that you use to solve the second quantized Hamiltonian. The second quantized Hamiltonian has 2 difficult parameters, the T and the V, the kinetic and the potential, and these are derived by using many-body perturbation theory to look at the interaction between the region and the host. But to understand that, you need to write down some equations. I mean,
I have seen an LSCO, I mean, this high TC material. So my question is, there are computation for these ITC, or the cuprates in this spirit?
Oh yeah, there are a lot of calculation, not done by us, but there are a lot of calculation. One way or the other, they are not calculation. I mean, maybe there is some input coming from DFT. Actually, there is always input coming from DFT, but certainly you cannot do cuprates based on mean field. DFT is a mean field theory. So they are one way or the other, always based on quantum chemistry method, or, and this has been very successful for some system, on what people call dynamical mean field theory, where they, it's again, a many-body theory, but based on methods that are borrowed from quantum chemistry, in a way. And there are a lot of calculation. Yeah.
So I don't see any other questions. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for coming.